So let's talk about the units and possessed monstrosities most in favour with the fickle gods of Chaos at the moment, which are the strongest datasheets for Chaos Space Marines. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where today we're talking Chaos Space Marines, and in this video I thought we'd take a look at some of the strongest units for the faction in current Warhammer 40k. Generally when moving into Arks of Omen, Chaos Space Marines have been struggling a bit, to be honest. In Nephilim they were doing kind of well, but they took some rather hefty nerfs and got the short end of the stick with the changes into Arks. A few really big deals for the faction, losing Armour of Contempt without that many points buffs in return, and a few targeted points and rules nerfs to the best things in the book. Abaddon, Terminators and the Mark of Slaanesh all going up, plus Creations of Bile got hit hard, their ability to fight in death basically halved. In terms of current tournament stats, they're hovering around about a 45% win percentage depending on the source that you get it from, much worse than Nephilim when they were more like 51 or 52%, though of course big variations between the legions there. They have been having a bit of grand tournament success with 3 wins and a fair few more high placings, and out of the various legions, Black Legion seem to be doing the best right now, very popular and lots of lists building around Abaddon. Word bearers are becoming a bit more prominent as well, with things like Emperor's Children and Creations of Bile being toned down a bit, and Emperor's Children certainly seem to be doing a fair bit worse than before, with the Mark of Slaanesh points increase. In this video though, I thought it would be interesting just to take a look at what's getting into the top Chaos Space Marine armies. I looked at 20 high performing Chaos Space Marine army lists, either going 4-1 or better at a grand tournament, or getting 3 wins to 0 at a small tournament. That should make things a bit more specific for actually units that work well on the board. We'll talk through the units in the order of how many times they were selected in these lists. Just one way that you can rank the power of units in Warhammer 40k, though I think it really is quite a helpful one, to be honest. If every successful competitive list takes a unit, then it usually tends to be auto-include to some level. Let's talk about the unit, how they're typically used for Chaos Space Marine armies, and what makes them strong. Before we get to the top 10 though, I thought it would be worth just mentioning a few honourable mentions. All of these are usable units and have 3 or more selections out of the 20 lists. Towards the bottom end of this, 3 lists took Chosen Noise Marines, Raptors, the Decimator, the Greater Brass Scorpion, allied demons of one flavour or another, Havocs and Obliterators. Out of this section there are some surprises. To be honest, I'm kinda surprised that so few people ran Chosen. These have been pretty popular before, and I guess it's probably due to Armour of Contempt going away, making them far less durable. I guess at least units like Terminators and Possessed have some sort of invul save. They really don't seem to be in favour at the moment though. The Noise Marines were basically all Emperor's Children, when they're much better in there than elsewhere. Havocs, Raptors and Obliterators I would have expected to be at this level, not unusable, but maybe not standout good. And perhaps you could argue that underrated in this section are the Greater Brass Scorpion and the Decimator, Forge World models that not every Chaos army is going to have. I feel like even 3 lists having taken and had good success with a Greater Brass Scorpion does imply that it's a really quite strong unit. Not many people would have one of those to run. The thing is pretty scary with some pretty massive melee and shooting, and it's pretty efficient for the points, though has a massive footprint. Moving slightly up in the world, 4 or 5 lists took either Rubric Marines, Warp Talons or Hellbrutes. For the most part these do feel like the next level up now. Rubric Marines in Codex Chaos Space Marines are very bitey with the Let the Galaxy Burn rule. D6 plus 2 shots out of each Warp Flamer is nice. Warp Talons are fast and decent melee damage dealers, even if they're a little bit fragile for the cost and only have damage 1 weapons. And Hellbrutes I think would have been rated further down, but since all of their war gear got a lot cheaper, they're actually not too bad on the battle line. Still not exactly seeing mass play, but they're definitely usable. Finally, just missing out on the top 10, we've got the Lord Discordant, Master of Executions, and the Sorcerer in Terminator armour. Perhaps the Lord Discordant is the single one that has most surprised to see out of the top 10. He's a very fighty melee threat, with mass mortal wounds with Flames of Spite, plus a scary Bale Flamer. It looks like competitive lists are tending to run the Daemon Prince instead though if they want a melee damage dealer and have to choose between the two. There's still plenty of people are taking the Disco Lord. The Master of Executions is just a nice cheap melee threat for the cost, and you can make him scary with certain demon weapons like a Lock of the Black, and I feel like the Sorcerer in Terminator armour is an interesting choice that we hadn't been seeing so much of before. Basically this one was only ever run in Black Legion with the Veilbreaker plate, essentially the Veil of Darkness for Chaos Space Marines, that one, teleporting a scary unit across the board. I guess again like Abaddon you could argue that the Sorcerer in Terminator armour should rank higher if it was in Black Legion. Quite a decent proportion of lists took one of those. Moving into the top 10 proper though, and in joint 10th place we have the Chaos Spawn, with 8 of the 20 lists taking some. Chaos Spawn are 25 points per model, you can field them as single units, they've got toughness 5 and 4 wounds, and 2d3 attacks at AP -2 and damage 2, plus some extra damage from their mutated Beyond Reason rule. Perhaps their most interesting rule is Hideous Regeneration, where if you don't kill them in one round of attacks, then they just regenerate back to full health. Potentially could make them very annoying to deal with for small units, potentially completely unable to kill them. For 25 points, they're really quite nice, cheap nuisances. They're nice and expendable and could be used to screen out the enemy or move block, or just a good choice to throw onto an objective as an expendable threat for trading, perhaps forcing the opponents to actually have to throw something fairly meaty their way to deal with them, so the damage doesn't just bounce. People who use them tend to go fairly light, just 1 or 2 units of 1 normally. Helpful individual model units to have around. Also in joint 10th place were the Terminators. In general though, a lot more points was spent on Terminators, as when they did tend to be taken in lists, they were usually taken in massive squads of 10. Chaos Terminators went up a little bit in Arks of Omen to 36 points. They're nice shock elites for the faction, strength and toughness 4 with 3 wounds and 3 attacks, a 2+ save and a 5+ invul, and they hit with a flurry of combi bolter fire and accursed weapons at strength 5 and AP 3. Plus you can take some decent damage dealing upgrades in the combi weapons and the power and chain fists. They're pretty much one of the best core units to build around, with stacking chaos buffs, things like delightful agonies from the Master of Possession, illusory supplication from the Dark Apostle, and resurrecting them with Pact of Flesh. They can also take the Black Rune of Damnation as well, with a -1 to wound across the whole unit, which is very nice. I did think it was a bit of a weird move to nerf them by increasing their points. It has done pretty much as I suspected within competitive lists. Either people tend to take absolutely 0 Chaos Terminators, or a full unit of 10 buffed up with all of the strong stuff. They're a unit that you really want to either go big or go home, and you don't really want to go in between. Those big 10-man units tended to take lots of power fists and several combi weapons. Both of those are extra good in Emperor's Children as well, where they ignore the modifiers. Quite a few of them like the Mark of Slanesh as well, to allow delightful agonies on the unit. Overall, I'd argue they're still a very strong selection. With the points increase and Armour of Contempt gone though, they're not really as strong as they were before, and not every list is choosing to run them. Coming in at 9th place with 9 selections out of the 20 lists are the Chaos Biker unit. These guys really seem to have come into their own in Arks of Omen. They weren't really taken all that much before. I feel like perhaps they might be a little bit more common now Black Legion's being played quite a bit more. They do work out quite well for them with close range shooting and then maybe diving into assault as well, triggering the +1 to hit. The bikers are 30 points per model, toughness 5 and 3 wounds, really quick movement with 14-inch move, and can pack a fairly serious amount of firepower, usually with their combi bolters on the bike, and then people like to load up on combi weapons on the riders for really quite a lot of firepower with 3 special shots and 6 bolt shots. Then after their shooting, they can certainly pack a punch in melee depending on how they're upgraded as well. If you take the Mark and Icon of Khorne, they could be hitting with really quite a lot of strength 5 and AP -2 attacks. Between the shooting and the melee, you could be hitting with quite a punch, particularly against lighter infantry. Plenty of people used other marks though, and typically they tended to go at least moderately light on these, usually 1 or 2 units, and often just the 1 unit of 5. In 8th place we have the trusty Venomcrawler. 10 out of the 20 lists took at least one of these, a fairly cheap and effective demon engine at 105 points, toughness 7 with 9 wounds and a 5+ invul, and then attacks with a bunch of strength 6 and 7 and damage 2 hits either at range or in combat. That's fairly all around effective and really quite nice against certain armies like Space Marines that might have a bunch of 2 wound models. I feel like the Venomcrawler often gets the nod above other demon engines and things, as it helps out your psychic a little bit as you move up the board. Getting a +1 to cast or a nearby Master of Possession is pretty nice, helping those really good psychic powers go off a lot easier. Plenty of lists did just take the one of these, though a fair few built out to more, and they do have access to some rather nice demon engine stratagems as well, like -1 damage, or Demon Forge if they need a bit of extra damage dealing of their own. In 7th place we have the big man himself, Abaddon the Despoiler. He was used in 12 of the 20 lists, though admittedly there was a bit of disparity between them. Basically, if you're playing Black Legion, he's almost auto-include, and if you're not playing Black Legion, it looks like his new 350 point price tag is now enough to make most lists leave him at home. Basically it means that if you're playing Black Legion, he should rank a bit above this. If you're not, then he should probably rank lower. Abaddon's 350 points, and it's just absolutely massive both in terms of damage and defense. He's got loads of barriers to damage, including his decent save, the Mark of Nurgle and the Mark of Zinch to nullify an incoming shot, plus the ability where he can't take any more than 3 wounds in one phase, so you can't just shoot him to death in one turn normally. In combat, he's got Mad Melee with Dracnian, a whole bunch of Strength 9 or 10 melee attacks with AP -4 and damage 3, plus some mortal wounds, and he also has some pretty nice Warlord traits and the ability to make one core character units reroll all their hits and wounds. Very nice either on himself or on a big massed up Terminator unit. Overall, that does seem to be enough to get him across the line in Black Legion lists. He's quite a good option for using the Black Legion stratagem as well to allow him to flex into another Legion's trait, such as getting advance and charge unexpectedly from Red Corsairs, and potentially giving him a really big threat range to charge something important. I guess overall though, for balance of the faction, it might not be the worst that he costs a little bit more. He used to be taken in just about every single Chaos list, Black Legion or not. In 6th place we have the Hulking Mutated Possessed. 13 lists of the 20 took them. There are 28 points per model Elite's choice, with a fast movement of 9, 3 wounds at toughness 5, and a whole bunch of strength 5 and damage 2 attacks in combat. Looks like currently in the melee damage dealer war between Chosen, Terminators, and Possessed, these guys have the upper hand, or at least the upper clawed tentacle anyway. Again, I'm not really too surprised that more people are taking these compared with the other choices. They weren't affected as much by the loss of Armour of Contempt, as their combination of a 3+ armor save plus 5+ invul means they're only really losing out against AP -1 and 2, but not against AP 3. They're also quite nice in Word Bearers as well, who've got a few nice support options to help them out. As a unit, these were a bit more mixed. Lots of people were running multiple units of 5 of them, a few people built out to multiple mid-size units or all the way up to 10. If you're not using the Black Rune of Damnation on something like a Terminator unit, then a Possessed unit could certainly be worse for that. Overall, nice scary frontline brawlers and quite fast at catching other enemy units too. In 5th place, with 14 lists taking them, are the Cultist mob. The Cultists are 5 points per model, cheap expendable chaff, not much damage or defense to speak of per model, fairly bad leadership, but at least they get objectives secured and are a nice cheap unit for doing things like screening, actions, or just dying on objectives instead of other things. Quite nice to hold down a home field point as well, rather than committing expensive Chaos Space Marines to do that. In Arks of Omen they got a bit better as well. While they're no longer mandatory, they got free war gear, plus they didn't really care about Armour of Contempt so much. Pretty much a net win for them. A lot of people like to pick up a free flamer, it would seem, to compensate for their low ballistic skill. Again, a fair few lists took more than one unit of them as well, maybe 2 or 3. They're quite nice and expendable just to throw onto objectives or hold down the home field alongside the main advance. It does seem that standard cultists outcompetes the accursed cultists by a fair bit. Despite all the extra melee damage that they can do and some of the extra defensive rules, it still seems that standard cultists win the day. And the same goes for traitor guardsmen. It seems that people just really don't want to spend the extra 10 points over the bare minimum to do the job. Moving up in the world, in joint 3rd place we have the Dark Apostle. 15 lists took the Chaos Chaplain equivalent. We're now kind of reaching the level where we're getting to fairly auto-include stuff. That's 3 out of 4 of the armies. The Dark Apostle's a really quite powerful support character, 95 points, so not enormously expensive, and he comes in a unit with both him and a couple of Dark Disciples, which actually make him really quite hard to deal with as characters go, as they can tank some big hits. It means that unlike other characters, he doesn't just have the chance of dying in a one-shot to a big damage D3+3 weapon if he does get exposed. Typically, this guy's usually just there to provide illusory supplication, the nice defensive prayer to the gods that means that the enemy can't hit a unit on a better than a 4+, and also can't re-roll hit rolls either. Really quite a massive debuff to their damage, particularly say if you were hitting on a 2 re-rolling or something. It's a really useful ability whether you're throwing it on a big Terminator battle line, or later in the game when things get a bit more chaotic, just using it on himself or other nearby characters. You could also flex it out for rerolls to hit in melee if needed. That's also quite powerful if that's going to be more useful than the defense for a turn. Plus a fair few people like to take the Marcus Lanesh as well. That one would allow you a prayer to allow them to advance and charge. Really quite big if it's going to make the difference between getting a big Terminator squad across the board and into combat, or sitting and getting shot for a further turn. The Dark Apostle is extra nice in Word Bearers as well. You can potentially have options for getting him 2 prayer casts per turn rather than just 1. It means that you can help out melee as well as provide toughness, which is really quite a big deal for a fairly cheap support character that most legions take just for the illusory supplication. Joint with the Dark Apostle in 3rd place, and also being one of the more auto-include Chaos Space Marine HQs, of which there are several, Here we've got the Heretic Astartes Daemon Prince, the nice all-round generalist that wings his way towards you and hits you very hard with a big sword. He's 135 points base once you've factored in the mandatory mark, and most people tend to upgrade him with wings as well, plus pick up the Hellforged sword for damage 3 and extra AP. Then you've got a fairly nasty melee monster with strength 8, AP minus 3 and damage 3, a big 6 attacks, and at least somewhat sturdy in defense with 8 wounds, toughness 6, and an invul save that's better at range than melee. He gives you a reroll, he casts a psychic power, and he has the fear special rule, so plenty of other support there. In general, the Daemon Prince has usually competed against the Lord Discordant for the fast-moving death dealer in combat for the Codex. It seems that they're a lot more common at the moment. I'd guess that that's probably due to the Armour of Contempt changes favouring the Lord Discordant less, and also Golak's got a small buff in Arks of Omen as well, and that Nurgle Demon weapon is a very common selection on the Daemon Prince, auto-wounding the enemy and ignoring any feel no pain type saves or damage caps, and now it also ignores -1 damage as well. For the psychic powers, Diabolic Strength is fairly commonly used as well. Extra attacks on a potent melee machine doesn't go down badly. Overall, he's just a very nice lurking threat to have in the ranks, and perhaps particularly good to know that you might be able to throw him at some of the toughest stuff in the game, things like Abaddon or a Catan Shard for example, and Golaks might be able to cut straight through them. Moving onwards and upwards in the world, and it seems that Arks of Omen really has brought a big about face for the Chaos Space Marine Legionaries, taken in 16 out of 20 of the top lists, when previously they were kind of rarely seen compared with Cultists. It looks like standard Chaos Space Marines are back in a big way. I'm sure the free war gear that they were handed out being a fairly big factor in that. The Chaos Legionaries are 18 points per model, so 90 points for a base squad before marks and things. They get 2 wounds and 3 attacks. The list that I saw did tend to take a bit of a mix of either bolters or chainswords. There didn't seem to be one that massively won out. For the war gear, they now get a free heavy chain axe for a big hitting attack with strength +4 and damage 2. The sergeant often wants to take a power fist, again for more heavy attacks like that. And then the majority of the time, other models in the unit often wanted to take melter guns or plasma guns. Occasionally I saw Reaper chain cannons as well. Often lists tended to take 2 or more of these units, so fairly popular and not just being taken in minimum amounts. Some of them made use of marks and icons, again fair mixes there, Khorne for melee, Slaanesh for delightful agonies, and Tzeentch to both nullify saves and a bit of extra shooting power. A lot of lists also chose to make use of the Balefire Tome to make one of the squad a Psyker as well. Things like Prescience or combining with the mark powers like delightful agonies seem quite handy to have around. Overall, it's fairly cool to see the standard issue Chaos Space Marines actually being really quite usable, but not all out dominant. They have been on the kind of underwhelming pile for really quite a long time now. It looks like with a handout of free war gear, plus their objectives secured though, it looks like it's their time to shine in Arks of Omen. Finally, lastly, and perhaps to not many people's surprise, we have the Master of Possession ranked in at first. The awesomely powerful faction Psyker is still very much an auto-include, usually buffing some big dangerous units with Pact of Flesh. The Master of Possession costs 105 points, and is a fairly standard issue Psyker in terms of stat line. It casts 2 different powers from the Malefic discipline, which the vast majority of people seem to take Pact of Flesh and Mutated Invigoration. The combination of +1 toughness and healing and reviving a model are excellent durability combos on one big tough unit. It's really nice with things like Terminators, Possessed or Chosen. A fair few of them took the Mark of Slaanesh for the 5+ Feel No Pain, and various combinations of buffing relics to help out their psychic powers. One relic can allow you to cast 3 times rather than 2, so you can have the god-specific power as well as the normal good ones. They've then got the Sacrificial Dagger, which potentially can make your casting better, as well as do some shenanigans with killing a unit then reviving it to make charge distance shorter. It's got the Warp Locust keyword if you happen to have some allied demons and is close to the front lines, and just in general it is a very hard HQ choice to go wrong with. Pact of Flesh is almost certainly going to redeem his value in points if he can cast it on good targets a couple of turns in a row, never mind any of the other ways that he might contribute to the game. Overall, the Master of Possession is just kind of hard to beat in terms of strong Chaos Space Marine units right now. So anyway, let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. Which Chaos Space Marine units have you been having particular success with at the moment, and which ones have been sitting on the shelf? I'll look forward to any other insights as well about units that I've talked about in the top selections. If you've enjoyed the video, then feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics. I'll certainly keep the regular 40k videos coming, and I do tend to post new ones just about every day. I've made similar style videos to this one for quite a few factions now. I'll leave a link to my Orcs one down in the video description if you'd like to see something similar for the greenskins. Finally, if you have been enjoying all the videos on the channel, I would just like to mention that Auspex Tactics does have a Patreon page as well, and you can find that linked in the video description below as well. The channel's Patreon page is what allows me to keep on making quite so many videos like this, so if you are enjoying quite a lot, any support is enormously appreciated. Channel patrons do get a fair few advantages, seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things happen next on the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with a chance to win some big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support, the link is down in the video description. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.